Name's Earl McKenna. Some folks around here just call me Earl. Been tied to the water my whole life, first by the salt of the ocean and now by the quiet, dark mirror of this lake. The sea, she teaches you about power and fury. A lake, though, she teaches you about secret. Pull up a chair, son. Let me tell you about the heaviest secret this water ever asked me to hold. The mist of that morning was a thick, wet blanket, the kind that muffles the world and makes you feel like the only man left alive. It clung to the surface of Miller's Lake, swallowing the far shoreline and leaving me and my little aluminum boat adrift in a sea of pearly gray. The only other soul in my universe was Buddy, my old rust-colored hound, who lay curled. His ragged breathing was a steady rhythm against the gentle lap of water on the hull, a sound more comforting than any church hymn I've ever heard. His ear would twitch now and then, a silent acknowledgment of a loon's lonely cry that pierced the quiet from some unseen place. At my age, you learn that time isn't a straight line. It's more like the water rings that spread out from a dropped pebble, circles inside of circles. Out here, with the cold seeping into my bones, the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves in my nostrils, I could be 72 or I could be 22. The feelings were the same. The anticipation, patience, it's a language the body never forgets. My hand, gnarled and mapped with scars of hooks and lines and 1,000 forgotten fights, knew the feel of the cork grip on my old casting rod better than they remembered the touch of my late wife's face. That's a sad thing to admit. The truth often is. This lake was my confessor now, my companion. It held my memories in its cold, silent depth. I'd been on the water since before the sun had even thought about rising, chasing the ghost of morning. The fishing was slow. A couple of small bass dispatched back to their murky homes with a gentle twist of the hook, a quiet. I wasn't out here for the meat, not really. I was here for the ritual, the precise flick of the wrist, the satisfying whir of the line unspooling, the gentle plop of the lure breaking the water's skin. It was a way of untangling the knots inside my own head. Buddy lifted his head, a low rumble in his chest. He always knew before I did. I glanced down at my rod tip, propped against the gunwale. It gave a slight, almost polite tap, tap, tap. A curious perch, maybe. I let the line go slack for a moment, inviting it to take the bait properly. Then the tap was replaced by a slow, heavy pull, the kind of pull that doesn't feel like a fish, but more like you've snagged a waterlogged tree limb from the bottom. I sighed, ready for the tedious work of freeing my line. I reeled in the slack and gave the rod a firm tug to try and work it loose. That's when the log woke up. The rod didn't just bend, it bowed with a groan that seemed to come from its very soul. The tip plunging violently toward the water's surface. The drag on my reel, set for a decent-sized pike, began to scream. It was a high, piercing shriek that shattered the morning's peace, a sound of pure, mechanical panic. Line tore from the spool at a speed I hadn't seen in 30 years. Buddy scrambled to his feet, barking, his nails scrabbling on the metal floor of the boat. "Easy, boy, easy," I grunted, my knuckles white. I gripped the rod. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the reel's song. This was no log. This was a monster. The stories around the local bait shop suddenly felt very real. Tales of a catfish the size of a man, a bottom dweller they called Old Horatio, who'd snapped more lines than any fisherman could count. A myth, a legend to spook the summer tourist, but the sheer brute force pulling me across the water felt very, very real. The little boat began to turn, pulled by this unseen leviathan. For the next hour, it was a battle of wills. It was a primal dance between me and the creature in the deep. Every ounce of my 50 years of experience came into play. I let it run when it needed to run, feeling the strain in my shoulders and back, a fiery protest from muscles that had long since settled into quiet retirement. Then, when the run slowed, I'd pump the rod, leaning back with all my weight, gaining a few precious feet of line with each turn of the handle. Sweat beaded on my forehead and dripped into my eyes, stinging. The mist had begun to burn off, but the world was still a blur of effort and adrenaline. I was no longer a tired old man in a boat. I was a hunter. The aches in my joints were forgotten, replaced by a surge of life, a feeling of purpose sharp and clear as the hook on the end of my line. I could feel the creature's movements, its patterns. It wasn't a panicked, thrashing fight like a northern pike. This deep, sullen power, a deliberate, ancient strength. It would dive, using its weight to try and bury itself in the mud and weeds of the lake bed. I had to keep the pressure on, keep its head up, steer it away from submerged snags I knew were there. This lake was my backyard. I knew every rock and fallen tree. Slowly, painfully, began to win. The runs became shorter. The pulls, while still immensely heavy, grew less frantic. I could feel it tiring, its great power beginning to wane. My arms burned, a back single knot of pain, but a grim smile touched my lips. I was going to do it. I was going to land the fish of a lifetime, the story that would make all the grizzled old-timers at the diner choke on their coffee. "All right, you old devil," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Time to see the sun." I hauled back one last time, my muscles screaming in protest. The surface of the water, about 20 feet from the boat, began to churn, not with splash, with a heavy, boiling disturbance. This was it, the moment of truth. My heart was a wild thing in my chest. I braced myself for the sight of cavernous mouth, of dark, whiskered flesh breaking the surface. I imagined its sheer size, its weight. I leaned over the side of the boat, peering into the murky green, my breath held tight in my lung. The water broke, but it wasn't the mottled gray head of a record-breaking fish that emerged. It wasn't a fin or a tail or the glint of a fish's eye. Through the disturbed water, something pale rose into the air, connected to my taut line. They were slick with water and green algae. Fingers clenched a desperate, impossible grip around the braided cord. They weren't the fins of a leviathan. They weren't of any ever. Too human, ghostly, one wrinkled. They held my fishing line for a breathtaking second, a terrible, silent tableau against the morning sun. Then, with a force that felt both intelligent and impossibly strong, they were yanked back under the surface. The line went instantly slack, the tension vanishing as if it had been cut. The splash echoed in a silence that was suddenly deafening. I stared at the spot, at the widening rings on the water where the hands had disappeared. My rod felt weightless in my... Buddy had stopped barking and was whining softly, pressing against my leg. My mind refused to process what my eyes had just seen. It was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by exertion and old age. It had to be. But deep down, in that quiet place that knows the truth, I knew it wasn't. I hadn't hooked a fish. I had hooked a man, or what was left of one, and it had just let go. The silence in the boat was a different kind of heavy. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a man alone with his thought. It was a hollow, ringing void where the impossible had just happened. My heart, which had been racing like a frightened deer, now felt like a lead weight in my chest. Buddy pushed his wet nose hard against my hand, whining, his brown eyes wide with a confusion that mirrored my own. Animals know. They don't get tangled up in logic and doubt. They feel the rupture in the natural order of things, and the order had just been torn to shreds. I reeled in the rest of my line with numb, trembling fingers. The hook was still there, the bait gone. Everything looked normal, but nothing was. The water was just water again, a placid surface of greens and browns, innocently reflecting the clearings. But it was a liar. It was a mask hiding a terrible secret. I started the small outboard motor, the sudden roar and obscene violation of the quiet, and headed back to the dock. I didn't look back. I was afraid of what I might see looking back at me. That night, sleep, stranger. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, those pale, wrinkled hands, the way they gripped the line, not with the blind panic of a drowning man, but with a kind of desperate purpose. Were they trying to pull themselves up, or were they trying to pull me down? I sat in my old armchair, the one worn smooth by years of my own weary bones, and listened to the house settle around. Creak of the floorboard, the hum of the old refrigerator. They were the sounds of my life, sounds of normalcy, but they felt alien, like a song played in the wrong. My first thought, the sane thought, was to Sheriff Graham. He's a good man. Known him since he was a boy stealing my orchard. Tell him, Arthur, I was out fishing this morning and I hooked a pair of hands. No, not a body, just the hands. Then they let go. I could hear the awkward silence on the other end of the line. I'd become the town eccentric overnight, the old fisherman whose mind had finally slipped its moorings. They'd come out with boats and dragging equipment, turn my sanctuary into a crime spectacle. They'd churn up the mud and the memories, and for what? To find nothing? The line had gone slack. Whatever or whoever it was gone. No, the lake had shown this to me and me alone. The secret felt personal. It felt like a burden I was meant to carry. For 2 days, I didn't go near the water. I busied myself with chores I'd been putting off for months. I fixed a loose board on the porch, oiled the hinges on the shed door, patched tear in one of my nets. I tried to bury the memory under the weight of mundane work, but it was no good. My gaze kept drifting back to the lake, to the calm surface that now seemed to watch me with a knowing stillness. The not knowing was a worse torment, fear. It was an itch under the skin, a question mark branded on my mind. On the third morning, I gave in. I told myself I was just going out for paddle to feel the sun on my... Buddy seemed to know I was lying. He hopped into the boat with a nervous energy he rarely showed, but I didn't take my favorite casting rod. I took my heaviest rig, the one I used for trolling in the deeps, spooled with a thick 80-pound test line that could haul a car out of a ditch. I wasn't fishing for a trophy anymore. I was probing for the truth. I motored out to the same spot, my stomach a cold, tight knot. I cut the engine and let the boat drift in the silence. It was a different day, bright, clear, with a light breeze that ruffled the water's surface. It felt wrong, too cheerful for the grim task at hand. I baited the hook, a big, heavy jig this time, and let the line sink down into the dark cold. I wasn't casting, retrieving. I was dragging the bottom, slowly, methodically, like a blind man feeling his way through a dark room. For hours, bumps, rock, a sunken branch, a demon for a minute, and a length of... With each snag, my heart would leap into my throat, a jolt of fear and hope, only to be replaced with the dull thud of disappointment. I was about to give up, to chalk the whole thing up to a waking nightmare, when the line went taut, familiar, dead weight. But this time, I didn't try to the hook. I just held the pressure, steady and gentle. I reeled slowly, my knuckle. There was no fight, just a heavy, sullen resistance. It wasn't a log. It felt softer. As it neared the surface, I saw a flash of dark color. My breath caught. I reached over the side with my net and carefully scooped it up. It was a waterlogged piece of canvas, torn and ragged from what looked like a heavy work coat. But trapped in a fold of the cloth was a small, metallic object. I worked it free with my thumb. It was a button, brass, with a strange anchor emblem embossed on its face. It wasn't from any coat I'd ever seen sold around here. A cold certainty washed over me. This was a clue, a message. Whoever was down there was real. I dropped anchor. I was going to stay here until I got another sign. As the afternoon sun began to dip toward the tree line, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple, it happened. A series of slow, deliberate pulls on the line. Tug, tug, tug. It wasn't the frantic jerking of a fish. It was rhythmic. It was intelligent. It felt like a knock door from the other side of the world. My hand trembled as I held the rod. I didn't reel. I just held on, letting the line be a conduit between my world and the one below. After a long pause, the pulls came again, but this time they were different. A long, steady pull to the left. I let out some line, and the boat drifted slightly. The pressure eased. It was signal, a direction. For the next hour, we played this strange and terrifying game. A pull would come, guiding me east and north. If I drifted too far off course, a series of short, sharp tugs would correct me, like a shepherd nudging a stray sheep. My fear was slowly being replaced by a profound and chilling awe. I wasn't dealing with a body. I was being led by a survivor. Someone was alive down there, trapped, and using my fishing line as their only voice, their only map. The line led me away from the open water toward the northern shore of the lake, a part I rarely visited. It was a tangled mess of fallen trees, thick reeds, and low-hanging willow branches that formed a dense, almost impenetrable curtain. An old, forgotten inlet choked by years of neglect. The water here was shallow and still, the color of strong tea, the air thick with smell of mud and decay. The steady pull drew me right to the mouth of this hidden cove. The entrance was dark, shadowed by the overhanging canopy of green. The line stayed taut, pointing directly into the gloom. Whatever was on the other end was in there. Buddy stood at the bow, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest, the hair on his back standing rigid. He could feel it too. We were on the threshold of something ancient and unknown. The decision was mine. I could cut the line, turn the boat around, and pretend none of this ever happened, or I could pull up the anchor, pick up my paddle, and push my way into the shadows to face the hands that reached out to me from. There's a moment in every man's life when he stands on a threshold. He can turn back to the safety of what he knows, or he can step forward into the darkness, knowing he'll be changed by it. For me, that moment was at the mouth of that forgotten cove, with the fishing line stretching into the gloom like a spider's thread, and my heart pounding a rhythm that said, "Go on, old man, see it through." I pulled up the anchor with a soft splash and traded the rod for a paddle. Pushing the boat into the inlet was like entering another world. The sunlight was instantly snuffed out by the thick canopy of leaves, and the air grew heavy and still, thick with the scent of 1,000 years of decay. Branches, slick with green moss, scraped along the sides of the aluminum boat, their touch skeletal fingers. The water was no longer water. It was a thick black syrup that swallowed the paddle with every stroke. But he didn't growl anymore. He stood rigid at the bow, a silent statue, his senses overwhelmed. The line, my only guide, remained taut, pulling me deeper into the shadows. It led me to a place where the cove widened slightly, ending in a jumble of collapsed rock and twisted, rusted metal. It looked like the remains of an old pump house or a forgotten pier from a time when this part of the lake wasn't so wild. The line disappeared into the water right beside a large submerged slab of concrete. I let the boat glide to stop, the silence broken only by my own ragged breathing. "Hello?" My voice was a dry croak, absorbed by the damp air. At first, there was no answer, only the drip of water from a hanging vine. I was about to call out again when I saw it. A movement, not in the water, but on the concrete slab. A face, pale as fungus, covered in a dirty matted beard, rose slowly to look at. The eyes were sunken in darks, but they were shocking. They burned, desperate, terrified light. "You came," a voice rasped, thin and brittle as a dry leaf. It was a man. He was wedged in the rubble, half in and half out of the water. One of his legs was twisted at an unnatural angle, trapped beneath the concrete. His clothes were shredded rags, and he was shivering uncontrollably despite the humidity. He was nothing more than bone and skin and those burning eyes. This was the source of the impossible strength on my line. This the ghost I had been chasing. I slowly paddled closer until the boat bumped gently against the debris. I could see it all clearly now. His leg was pinned horribly by a shift in the old foundation. He must have been here for weeks. I looked at his hands, resting near the water's surface. They were the same hands I had seen, white, wrinkled, and raw. How long? I asked, my voice softer now. Don't know. A long time. The sun. I watch it move through the leaves, he whispered. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that shook his whole frame. I was hiding, found this place, thought it was safe. There was a storm. The ground shifted. He gestured weakly with his chin toward the rubble. I heard your boat. For days. Threw a rock tied to some old wire I found. Kept missing. Then I felt your line. A miracle. He was a man named Julian. He didn't tell me his whole story, not then. He didn't have the strength to together from the broken. A life that had gone wrong. A bad decision that had snowballed. And a desperate need to just disappear from the world. He hadn't been running from the law so much as he was running from himself. He had found the loneliest spot he could, a place to let the world, and it had become his tomb. I looked at him, this broken piece of humanity, and I saw the truth of my. All those years, I'd chased the thrill of the fight, the weight on the line, the satisfaction of landing a big one to hang on the wall or tell a story about. But this was different. The lake hadn't given me a trophy. It had given me a man's life. It had given me a secret heavier than any fish. The choice was simple. Really, I could paddle out of this dark place, go straight to Sheriff Graham, and do the right thing. There would be sirens, official boats, questions, reporters. They would tear this place apart to get him out. His story would become public, his past dredged up alongside his broken body. My quiet lake would become a spectacle, its deepest secret laid bare for all to see. Or I could do the lake's thing, the quiet thing. I reached into my tackle box, past the lures and hooks, and pulled out the small fillet knife I always carried. Without a word, I reached over, and with a single decisive slice, I cut the fishing line. The frayed end recoiled, and for the first time in days the rod in my boat was free. The connection was severed. Julian's eyes widened in panic. "No, please, hush now," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not leaving you." I opened my thermos and poured the last of the lukewarm coffee into the cup, holding it to his cracked lips. He drank it like it was the elixir of life itself. "I'll be back," I said, "when it gets dark, with food and tools. We're going to do this quietly." He stared at me, his eyes swimming with a mixture of disbelief and a kind of profound gratitude no words could ever. He just nodded. Slow, weak movement of his. I paddled out of the cove, back in the golden lighting sun. The world seemed impossibly bright and loud after the gloom of that inlet. Buddy, who had been frozen with tension, finally relaxed, nudging my hand as now, and it was. I wasn't just a lonely old man anymore, marking time until the end. I had purpose. I was the keeper of a secret, the guardian of a life. My long, solitary conversation with the lake had finally been answered. The greatest catch of my life wasn't something I could ever show to anyone, but it was the only one that truly mattered. It wasn't a fish I had pulled from the water, it was soul. And in saving him, I had a strange feeling I was also saving a part of myself. Thank you for listening to an old man's tale. If these stories stir something in you, consider subscribing. It lets me know someone's still out there on the shore, listening. The greatest catch in life is never a trophy to be displayed, but a responsibility to be shouldered. True purpose is often found not in conquering nature, but in quietly protecting the fragile lives hidden within its depths, including our own. I'm Earl McKenna, and these are my stories. If you have a moment to spare for an old fisherman's memories, please subscribe. It means more than you know.